The second spider story I got from Takora in Tia's house in Beduri. It's called The Fairy's Sealed Room. But it starts with Hunter. Hunter used to go out every day with his gun and his throwing stick and his bag, trying to get some game, because a bit of extra meat was always useful for the pot in the diet that's mainly vegetarian, and also he could get good money from the traders who came from the town, who would buy bush meat to sell to restaurants and rich people who had their own cooks. But it was getting harder and harder. His father had told him of the old days when there were antelopes and warthogs and all sorts of fine animals that were running in numbers in the bush. But since people have brought the modern hunting rifles instead of the old homemade Dane guns, there was less and less game to be had. So Hunter went on and on through the bush, further and further, trying to find something worth a cartridge. He finally burst through some thorny bushes and came to a clearing, and in the middle of that clearing there was a sealed room. It looked like an ordinary room, just like he had in his own house, just like they have all over Africa. A cylindrical mud wall with a conical thatch roof. But this one was closed up. There were no doors or windows. Now normally you build a cylindrical wall and then you cut the door and window holes so that you can go inside and outside and plaster it to keep the rain from spoiling the mud, and then you can put the roof on. So Hunter looked at this sealed room. How could anybody build it complete with the thatch without a door or window? He went round it, scratching his head, wondering what on earth this was. Then suddenly he heard some crashing footsteps coming through the bush from the opposite direction. The whole thing was so uncanny he was really scared, so he scuttled across the clearing and hid behind a big rock. As he peeked round the rock, what should he see coming into the clearing but a fairy? Now you need to know about these West African fairies. They're not little butterfly flippy floppy creatures like in our Victorian and Edwardian children's books. They're much more serious beings. You might think rather more like the elves of Thomas the Rhymer or Terry Pratchett's Lords and Ladies. In real life, not in folk tales, the fairies look like little hairy men with red hair, and the most noticeable feature when you see one is that the feet are on back to front. So if you find footprints in the bush and you try to track them, you'll be going the wrong way. What they do is like the idea of being pixie-led or following Will-o'-the-Wisp. If you meet a fairy in the bush, you may have gone out for a trip or be going across from one village to another, and you'll suddenly not be heard of again, maybe for months and months. And when you come out, you may be mad, or have a completely different personality, or not even realise that you've been away a long time. Anyway, there was this fairy, and this fairy had a big bag of meat over his shoulder. He'd obviously been hunting too, and with much more success. And he went up to the sealed room and said, "Blakaka." This is a magic word. You might think of it as something like open sesame. When he said "Blakaka," the whole room opened up like an oyster shell. So he went inside, put his meat on a rack. Then the fairy came out again and said, "Salagagumgum." another magic word, abracadabra, or some Latinate thing like in Harry Potter. When he said Salagagumgum, the room closed up. You couldn't see where it had opened, and off the fairy went. When it was quiet for a long time and he thought it was quite safe, Hunter came out from behind his rock and said, I see. Fairy gets his meat from his hunting, and then he comes to this room and says, Blakaka, and it opens, and he can go in and store his meat, and then when he comes out and says, Salagagumgum, it closes again. So he tentatively went up to the room and said, Blakaka! And lo and behold, the room opened up like an oyster shell. And he went in. He didn't want to be caught in a place he shouldn't be, so he said, Salagagumgum! And the room closed up. He bumbled around and he filled his bag up with completely full of the meat from the fairy's store. Then he said, Blakaka! And the room opened. He went out. Salagagumgum! It shut up again, and off he went home with a good haul of meat. The next day he thought, was it all a dream? No, I've got all this meat. Is it still there? He followed his track back to where he found the sealed room, and there it was. Blakaka, pop inside, Salagagumgum, room closes, collect some meat, Blakaka, open it up, Salagagumgum, shut it, and off home with the meat. Now in the hunter's village lived our friend Mr. Spider. And you know he's not only greedy in general, but he's particularly keen on having meat to eat, because that's a real treat. And he noticed that Hunter didn't seem to be going to the bush so often, didn't need to go to the bush so often. He seemed to have plenty of success and have lots of meat to eat and to sell. So Spider thought, Hunter's got some secret. And he hid and watched Hunter going off into the bush one morning and sneaked along just out of sight, keeping Hunter in his sights, until they came to the clearing, and there stood the sealed room. This time Spider hid behind the rock, and he watched as Hunter went up to the room and said, Blakaka! And the room opened like an oyster shell. He went inside, Salagagumgum, and it closed up. Then from inside the door, inside the room, Spider heard Blakaka, and it opened up again. Out came Hunter with a great bag full of meat, Salagagumgum, and it closed. And off Hunter went back on the path to the village. Wow, thought Spider. This is a magic meat store. I'm going to have me some of this. Now what did he say? To open it he said Blakaka, and to close it he said Salagagumgum. Alright, we'll try that. So he went up to the room and said Blakaka, and it opened like an oyster shell, and he went inside and found there was still plenty of meat. Salagagumgum, he said, and the room closed up. And he collected a good haul of meat and put it in his bag. Blakaka, he said, and the room opened. He came out, Salagagumgum, he closed it, and went off back home to the village. Wow, didn't he have a feast that night? Stuffed himself so full he could hardly walk. The next morning, however, he thought, wow, I'm going to try that again. Off he went through the path and found the sealed room. Blakaka! The room opened like an oyster shell, and he walked inside. Salagagumgum! He closed it. And unfortunately, old Spider was so excited he got a bit confused, and when he got a good load of meat, He said, "Salagagungum." Nothing happened. He said, "Salagagungum." The room stayed locked up tight. "Oh dear," he said, I've forgotten the openings. I don't know how, it's not working, how can I get out? Oh dear me, oh. He sat there for some time and then he heard somebody outside. "Help," he said, "help." It was Hunter's son, who happened to be going through the bush. "Hello," said Hunter's son, "that sounds like Spider. Where are you, Spider?" "Help," said Spider, "I'm locked in here. It's your dad's secret room." "Oh," said Hunter's son, "well, what's the problem?" "I can't get it open. It won't open. Salagagum, it won't open." "Oh," said the lad, "well, I can't do anything about this. I'll have to go home and ask Dad." So off he went through the bush. And Spider sat there. And Spider sat there. The boy got home. He said to his father, "I found a sealed room in the bush and old Spider was inside, and he says he can't get it open." Hunter shrugged his shoulders and said, "Look, go back and tell him, to get it open you have to say blakaka." "Okay," said the boy, "blakaka, blakaka." And off he went, back on the path into the bush. And he was just getting near the clearing when he came to a slippery place, and he slipped up and went, "Wee bonk!" And he was so shaken up, all he could think of was, "Wee bonk!" My feet went away from under me. I went, "Wee bonk!" So when he got to the room, he called out to Spider, "Right, what you have to say is, wee bonk. It won't open unless you say, wee bonk." So Spider dutifully said, "Wee bonk." And still nothing happened, and the room was still tight shut. Well, while they were scratching their heads and bemoaning what had happened, they heard a blink-a-bonk, blink-a-bonk, bonk, blink, blink, bonk. And through the bush came Father Hunter. He was playing his Sanka piano, which is a sort of box with flattened bike spokes on it, different lengths, that when you twang them they make a tune. And he was singing a little song, "Poor old silly fool with his blakaka salagagum, daft old Spider, blakaka salagagum." When he got there he said, "You say blakaka to open it and salagagum to close it. You keep saying salagagum. Do it right. Say blakaka." So Spider said blakaka, and the room opened. And he came out very crestfallen, and Hunter said, "Right, this time you can have half the meat and I'll have the other half. But if I see you over here any time again, I'll write your name on the wall and tell the fairy where to find you." And that was the end of Mr. Spider's free meat for a long, long time.